The New 52 that DC did in 2011 was done for one specific reason: to make money. I don't say this as a bitter comic fan who hates the idea of comic books being products as opposed to art pieces. Comic books are a product. They are sold in order to make money. And they can be art, yes, they can, and a good editor and a great creative team are striving to do just that, in my opinion. But comic books are a product first, and the comic industry has been struggling to survive for a long while now. And keep in mind, we are well past 2011. Oftentimes, one of the largest reported barriers to new readers trying a comic out is the history behind it. Even if you could somehow stumble across an issue of like Superman or Batman in the wild, you might be looking at issue like 401 or 285 or something similarly grandiose. That's a lot of back issues for a new reader to worry about. So what if a company just got rid of all that? Thus, the New 52. This idea of shedding all past history and versions of a character then necessitates that the version of the character being presented to the audience for seemingly the first time needs to be the most iconic, the most simple, and the most widely accepted version of the character. Because if the publisher does their job right, there will be no comparing this version of, let's say, Batman to previous versions of Batman, because those ones don't exist anymore. The only Batman that we have is the Batman that we are given. So it really threw me off when Aquaman's comic launched and he wasn't the king of Atlantis. Like, there are two things that I would say most everybody who knows about Aquaman knows about Aquaman. The first is that he talks to fish, and the second is that he is the king of Atlantis. But that's not what we opened this volume on. One of Aquaman's two most iconic status quos, and the character himself says that he doesn't want to be a part of it. Author Geoff Johns opened this volume with Arthur deciding to stay away from the throne. He played against one of the most mythical parts of Aquaman's background. And now, almost 2 years and 16 issues later, Aquaman is back on the throne. So why the runaround? And what does it have to do with Aquaman's connection to the Justice League? Well, my name is Ben, and I'll be exploring those questions on this weird episode of Comic Book Breakdown, episode 26.15 of Aquaman. Aquaman and the Justice League. Back in episode 26.2, when we first covered Arthur's choice to not be king, I guessed a really simple reason for the move. Keeping Arthur off of the throne, working to defend the surface world, tied him more closely to humanity, the world that we know and live in as an audience. Johns may have felt that it was important for the audience to really get to know Aquaman as a person before we got to know him as a king. You want to go on a couple dates before you get married, right? Johns has used our first two major story arcs since then to really demonstrate who Arthur is and how he behaves. Our first arc with the Trench saw Aquaman step away from Atlantis and battle those creatures. We learned that Arthur loved and missed his father, that he has a woman in his life that he loves and respects, Mera, and that he was responsible AF, and that no matter how the surface world felt about him, he was going to do the right thing, because that is the right thing to do. The second story arc with the Others showed us Arthur's flaws. That there's an undercurrent of anger to the man so great that he killed Black Manta's father. He is also bad at sharing personal information, thanks to being hounded by the media as a teenager, and he tends to take on tasks that are bigger than he is in order to protect those around him. Showing Arthur with the Others also demonstrates to us how he leads, or fails to lead. As I mentioned in the wrap-up episode to the Others, the team never really comes together, like as a team by the end of that story. They're a loose group of allies, sure, but they aren't really a team, demonstrating to us as an audience that Arthur is not a natural-born leader, even if he is a natural-born king. All of that excellent writing was being complemented by Arthur's ongoing role as a member of the Justice League. Despite my initial desire to not cover all of the League's 2011 series, I have to admit that since reading it alongside Aquaman, I've really been impressed by how much Johns was able to do with them. It was all of those lingering thoughts and observations that led to the rather sudden and honestly unexpected writing of this episode. This wasn't planned. This is just a bunch of stuff that had been building up in me over the course of a couple of weeks. You know, sometimes you get like an earworm stuck in your head when you're listening to a particular song or piece of music. Well, apparently sometimes I lay awake in bed at night thinking about how excellently Justice League and Aquaman 2011 complement each other, despite sharing almost no obvious story elements. You have your cross to bear, I have mine, I'm sorry. The first 6 issues of Justice League are the new origin story for the team. The alien despot Darkseid attempted to invade Earth, and Batman, Superman, Green Lantern, The Flash, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and Cyborg turned him away. I won't lie, this is a long story. For essentially being one battle, it takes 6 months of publication time for the team to get through it. But in reading it, it does feel epic, it feels cinematic, it feels much more mythic. To me, it kind of feels like a Marvel story. Over at Marvel, their answer to the Justice League, the Avengers, were brought together for the first time battling Loki, the god of mischief, who has gone on to have a cemented role as an Avengers bad guy ever since. He was a big threat when the book relaunched as part of the Heroes Reborn event. He was the final villain they faced, actually. He was the reason the second generation of Avengers came together in 1996's A Next ongoing series. And more recently, Loki manipulated the events that caused the 2018's team to come together, and even played a role in the final arc of that book, where the multiversal Avengers helped save the universe from a multiversal army of Doctor Dooms. It was ridiculous and big and over the top, and it went to show that Loki is as much a part of the Avengers as the Avengers were a part of Loki's story. The Avengers wouldn't exist without Loki and his manipulations, and he has become an integral part of their mythology since then. In comparison, the Justice League originally debuted in The Brave and the Bold issue 28, facing down the alien conqueror Starro, who is a giant starfish. And it can make like little Starros who then stick to people's faces and control their brains. And like, Starro has faced the League multiple times in differing comics. He's threatened, I think, everybody who's been a part of the League at one point or another, but he's never really been famous either. Like, he's not a Loki-level bad guy over at DC, right? And despite that being the first time that the League came together in publication history, DC eventually retconned their own origin. In Justice League of America issue 9, the team recounts that they first came together to battle the aliens called the Apalaxians. The Apalaxians' great claim to fame as part of the story arc is how they almost turned the Justice League into trees. Again, this is not exactly an epic, mythic, movie-worthy origin story, if you get what I'm saying. So upgrading to Darkseid as the main villain for the catalyst of their coming together is a really smart move. Darkseid is a big threat. He challenges characters like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman easily in terms of being a physical powerhouse. And he also heralds a larger force, like his home world of Apocalypse and all the armies that are at his command, and he hints at a larger story thanks to his connections to the New Gods mythology behind him. Not a lot of stuff that we've seen in movies at this point, but as comic fans, you know that Darkseid, maybe he is the biggest bad in DC Comics, but he is also just the key to a larger piece of mythology that could lead to a whole other area of story exploration. As part of that plot, Darkseid sent his agents, armored winged monsters called parademons, to plant a device called the Mother Box around the globe. These boxes could open teleportals, allowing Darkseid's army to come forth and invade the globe. Batman was pursuing one of the parademons in Gotham City when Green Lantern showed up. This Lantern, a human man named Hal Jordan, was surprised to discover that Batman actually exists. Up to this point in DC history, Batman was considered more of a myth, or like an urban legend. He is not a bright, showy character like Superman or Wonder Woman or The Flash. He is a dark character hiding in the shadows. He doesn't want people to know that he exists. So this is a really funny moment. It is also important to note, because of how Batman and Aquaman's relationship will grow in this story, and I will tie us back to this. The Lantern explains that his power ring alerted him to an unknown alien presence on Earth, the Parademon, and so he swung by to do his job, kick its ass. The Parademon plants a mother box in the sewers of Gotham, and when the Lantern tries to approach it, it self-destructs. Green Lantern and Batman survive, thanks to his ring, but the Parademon is gone, save for the mother box that it left behind. Batman believes that it too is alien in origin, and so Green Lantern suggests that they visit the alien in Metropolis. They arrive on the scene of another Parademon attack, but Batman is the only one who notices the damage around them. Already worked up by his fight with the Parademon, Superman attacks the pair, suspecting that they were allies of it. While they are bouncing around Metropolis in a green energy ring bubble, Green Lantern calls a friend of his, the Flash. Thanks to his super speed, the Flash is able to kind of unwind Superman a little bit, let him blow off a little steam without actually hurting anybody, and Batman is then finally able to explain why they are here. He asks if Superman has found a box similar to theirs, and no, he thought it blew up with the Parademon that attacked him. Fun fact, that particular mother box was actually taken into custody by Star Labs, a scientific research firm headed up by Silas Stone. Stone is so busy researching this artifact, actually, that he skips his son's football game, forcing his son to visit him at the lab. His kid, Victor Stone, enjoys playing football and actually has an incredibly good chance at getting a full scholarship to any university of his choice, but only if his father will talk to the scouts. Silas has no interest in games, though. He looks at the world and he sees people like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman running around, people who are going to outclass his son in every way. What does it matter if you can tackle somebody the hardest when someone like Superman can tear through buildings? He just can't afford this distraction, Victor. Before Victor leaves, the mother box begins to ping, as if it is counting down. The one that Batman has does the same. When it finally explodes, opening a teleportal, a horde of new parademons and dimensional energy pours out, and it engulfs poor Victor. The heroes then spend roughly an issue fighting the parademons. Wonder Woman, who is eager for a fight, joins them. Batman is the only one of the group who notices that the parademons aren't killing people or just causing random property damage, they are actually collecting humans. The monsters circle above the ocean, and suddenly a massive tower manifests from it. And so, Aquaman enters the story. If you've been listening to my breakdowns of Aquaman, then you know that there is a period of his past that author Geoff Johns hasn't really explored yet. We know that Arthur grew up on the surface, that Dr. Shin exposed his Atlantean heritage, he hired Black Manta to acquire a blood sample to prove that he was Atlantean to the public at large, and the ensuing fight between them caused Arthur's dad, Thomas Curry, to have a heart attack that ultimately led to his death. Arthur then turned his back on the surface world and sought out Atlantis. This led him to Vulko in Norway, who then took Arthur to Atlantis, where he assumed the throne. During his time on the throne, Arthur went on a series of adventures, which led to him meeting the others and acquiring the armory of the Dead King, as they hunted Black Manta. The Arthur that we meet here, in this particular story, appears to be that time period of Arthur's life. King Arthur, baby. He has long sideburns, like mutton chops, and I know that everybody goes through these weird periods of self-discovery in their youth, but god dang do they look stupid on this man. But he's a king, he's got superpowers, so what does my opinion matter? Anyway, his hair is much longer, he's got the sideburns, he's wearing his orange mail shirt and green pants, classic, while also wielding the indestructible trident, although there is a chain attached to it, the idea being that he throws the trident at an enemy and then he can pull it back with the chain. He has since ditched that chain. I don't know if he just got so skilled with the trident he doesn't worry about it, or if he's just like, oh well, if I throw the trident and it disappears, I don't care. Like, I don't know. It's never really explained or addressed, which is weird because there are some other small things that do get explained or addressed. But he's got the spear. Don't worry about it. The only other real marker of time is that Arthur is still wearing the blue and green jeweled necklace that we saw Volko offer him in Aquaman issue 0, a necklace made from the jewels that once rested in the dead king's crown. This is what helps give us a good idea of what time period of Arthur's life this story is happening in. Somewhere between him abandoning the surface world and him giving up being king. Arthur looks at the assembled group of weirdos and immediately suggests that he be placed in charge of them. He is, of course, a king already, and therefore he is more than qualified. But the only person who has any idea who this dude even is Batman. He's Aquaman, he says, and Green Lantern laughs. Quote, Aquaman? I thought this dude was a sketch on Conan O'Brien, end quote. Aquaman assures him that he is quite real, obviously, and the Lantern looks around incredulously. Quote, first Batman's real, now this? End quote. Author Geoff Johns is doing something very important here, and he's going to reinforce it in just a sec, so I'm going to come back around to it. Aquaman tells the assembled heroes that he found one of these monsters, and here he holds up the corpse of a parademon in the ocean. It set off some kind of device that tore open a hole in the water, and then more of them came out of it. You've all gathered to fight them up here, and I don't see a leader, he says. So dang it, I think I should be the guy for the job. Batman, however, glares at him, somehow having his face covered in shadow despite being under nothing. If you don't see a leader, then you aren't looking at me, he says. And Green Lantern steps in again, explaining that Superman can juggle tanks, Wonder Woman can slice through anything, the Flash is the fastest man alive, and me? Well, I can do anything with my power ring. We already have Batman, who does not have superpowers, Aquafresh, trying to boss them around. Why should they listen to you? A fresh wave of parademons gathers in the sky, and then suddenly streaks towards the heroes, shouting, For Darkseid! Aquaman takes a moment to concentrate, and massive sharks rise up out of the ocean and eat the parademons in mid-air. I am tempted to call these things megalodons because just look at them. They're huge. One of the survivors does manage to dodge, and he streaks towards Aquaman, who just jabs upwards through the jaw with his trident. He shucks off the body, spins around, and then mean mugs Green Lantern. That is what I can do. Green Lantern looks away. Yeah, never mind. That's not bad. That's pretty cool. And pause the breakdown here, because this is important. Not Aquaman showing off what he can do. That establishes what he can do and what he's bringing to the team. That is important, but not for what I want to talk about. No, the important thing here is Batman. And I'm not saying that as a Bat fan who thinks that Batman is the most important thing in the room at any given time. But author Geoff Johns does know that a large contingent of DC's buyers are Bat fans. Batman is, generally speaking, DC's best-selling character with the most ongoing series, specials, one-shots, and tie-ins in their entire publishing line. Why do you think this volume of Justice League started with Batman's plot thread at the beginning of issue 1, and then the rest of the cast has been pulled in over the course of 4 issues? Batman might not be the most powerful guy on the team, but he is probably the smartest. He's certainly the most driven, I would argue, and people love him from a comic buying perspective. Geoff Johns knows this, and he is using these Bat elements to boost Aquaman's profile. Out of all the people on this team, who are the 2 of them that are considered myths? Batman and Aquaman. Out of all the people on this team, who are the 2 considered the most useless by their peers? Batman and Aquaman. Out of all of the people on this team, who are the 2 vying for a leadership position? Batman and Aquaman, my friends. Maybe he is doing it subconsciously, maybe Geoff Johns is doing it intentionally, I certainly don't know, but Johns is definitely associating Aquaman with Batman in this scene. He is telling the audience, hey, if you like Batman, then you should like Aquaman too. He is just as cool. And while he does it, he does it while he is acknowledging that Aquaman is a joke to the broader public at large. Even the Green Lantern only knew of Aquaman as a joke on Conan O'Brien. The world thinks that Aquaman is a joke, Geoff Johns is saying, but Batman takes him seriously. And so should we. This idea is echoed once again in Justice League issue 13. If you're wondering, they defeat Darkseid. Big shock there. The good guys win, right? After the events of the second story arc of Justice League, Colonel Steve Trevor is being held in a military hospital, recovering from injuries. Guess who breaks into his hospital room to ask him some questions? Why, it's Batman and Aquaman! The idea of Aquaman as team leader gets brought up again, kind of vaguely, in Justice League issue 12. The team had just survived the machinations of a man named David Graves, who lost his family as a result of Darkseid's invasion. This is the second story arc of Justice League. He blamed the League for failing to discover the cause of their deaths and his own terminal disease. To do so, Graves orchestrated a series of public attacks on the League, defaming them in front of the world at large. By the end of the arc, the League had saved those who were put in danger and defeated Graves, but now the world didn't trust them. Their faith had been broken. They had seen the League fighting with each other on TV and the internet, and Graves' story revealed that the League can't stop every danger in the world. As the public began to turn on the League, they balked a little bit. For Green Lantern, The Flash, Superman, and Wonder Woman, this level of distrust was kind of new. But for Arthur, this was every day of his life since Dr. Shin outed him. What the world thinks of them isn't the problem, he argues. What is the problem is the reality that they're living in. Because they did fail. Graves is right. They didn't help his family. This team needs new leadership. And Arthur thinks that he is the man to do it. Batman argues that they all agreed to me being leader a long time ago. And Aquaman even gives him the point. Yeah, you are a great strategist, Batman, no argument. But you aren't inspiring. I lead a continent. I bring people together. I can do this, Aquaman says. Batman isn't so sure about that, though. He knows about the others, and they're in worse shape than the League is. Additionally, what has Arthur done for Atlantis lately? Remind me? That's interesting. The Others story arc hadn't finished at this point in Aquaman's ongoing series, but we have seen how broken they are in that story. They were shattered and separated for years. Vostok was hiding on the moon. I'll never not love that fact. The prisoner was sitting in a psychiatric ward. Kahina, Yawara, and the operative were all off doing their own things. I have pointed out before that the Others don't really operate like a team, not like this version of the Justice League does. And I'll even point out that this version of the Justice League is not a well-oiled superhero machine. Author Geoff Johns writes them as very adversarial. These characters all have wildly different backgrounds, powers, and personalities, and sometimes within the construct of this story, they do clash with each other. Green Lantern is kind of a cocky asshole, poking Batman just because he thinks that it's fun to poke Batman. The Flash sometimes joins in on that fun because he is friends with Hal in a way that he isn't friends with Batman or Superman or Wonder Woman. Like, the Flash doesn't think that annoying Batman is a good idea, but if Batman's already annoyed, you might as well join in on the fun, right? And when Wonder Woman's friend and kinda sorta ex-Colonel Steve Trevor is put in danger by Graves, she nearly takes Green Lantern's head off getting to him. Batman pointed out in the opening arc that he might be the only one amongst them who does not have superpowers, but he is the only one amongst them who can keep this strange array of people on point and focused on accomplishing a mission. And that's true. Everyone listens to Batman. He squashes their interpersonal problems easily, and he's always got a plan. He takes this whirlwind of superhumanity that is the Justice League, and he directs it in a way that nobody on this team is able to do. Batman does for the Justice League what Aquaman has never been able to do with the others. So why is Aquaman so determined to be the League's leader? There's a secondary idea behind this that actually feeds into that question, and it's when Batman asks Arthur, what has he done for Atlantis lately? Is Batman hinting that he knows that Arthur isn't the king of Atlantis anymore? I don't personally think that's the case here. This story takes place before the Throne of Atlantis crossover, and Arthur not being the king is presented as being news to everyone on the League in that story. There's also no reason why Batman would know that, as we have seen that Arthur is pretty protective about his personal life and history. It's not like Batman could, tap Atlantis' phone lines, or he's been spying on Arthur from the shadows in his bedroom. That would be super creepy. No, what I think Batman is saying here is that Arthur has been spending a lot of time on the surface lately. Between adventures with the League and the happenings over in Aquaman's own ongoing series, Arthur hasn't really been spending much time underwater lately. That implies that either Atlantis is fine in its day-to-day operations and doesn't need its king, or Arthur isn't king. And if Batman doesn't know about Arthur not being king, if he trusts Arthur and believes that he's the king when he says he is, then I could see him assuming that everything underwater must be fine, and they don't really need Arthur. Out of these two things, I am much more interested in Arthur's motivation for this bid to lead, though. We have seen him fail to communicate or lead the others terribly well already. That's established. His ongoing series has also shown Arthur fail to work well with the police or the US military. Him wanting to lead the League during their opening arc made a lot of sense at the time for the character. Aquaman was the king of Atlantis at that moment, actively ruling the undersea nation. Between Vulko talking him up as the rightful king and, then being a king, I am sure that Arthur was really feeling it at that moment. And I could understand him walking into a room and going, I'm the guy in charge. I've been the guy in charge for years, everybody. Everybody calm down. I got a plan. I don't know what it is, but I got one. Let's fix some stuff. I could see that in that moment. But the trick with that is the opening arc of Justice League happened years ago at this point. The League has gone on to defeat a number of threats since then. They've largely had a good history working together, and it really feels weird that Arthur hasn't let this idea go yet. Has Batman somehow not proven himself at this point? Does Arthur really not trust him when he was the one so critical to getting them through Graves' attack in that second story arc? Or, and this is more my personal theory, is Arthur looking to prove himself? I've been in a similar position where I was once in a leadership position and I was kind of forced to step down, half by choice, half by the deeds of other people. And despite that loss of power, I have had a hard time letting go of that mindset. I still think and I still behave like the leader that I used to be. I still try to do those things. It's just that doing so gains me nothing in my particular situation. But I can see Arthur stepping down from the throne because it's too much responsibility and he doesn't want to do it, but he still has trouble letting go of being a king, being a leader. I've noted before that Arthur certainly acts imperiously over in his own comic book, so maybe that is manifesting here with the League as a desire to lead the team. It could also be that being chosen to lead the League means approval from his peers. We know that Arthur feels more comfortable amongst the Justice League than he does anywhere else. They are his peers, his friends, while the others kind of feel more like co-workers, or maybe, in the most worst way to put it, burdens. Arthur doesn't really want to hang out with them. He wants to hang out with the Justice League, and so he has. So maybe Arthur is seeking the acceptance that he wants from the surface world and that he wants from Atlantis from the Justice League instead. This is the kind of complicated, messy stuff that I think author Geoff Johns has done so well with Aquaman. He's got all of these flaws and complications, but he is also still heroically motivated and driven to do more, to be better. When Arthur was forced to kill the Trench, the guilt haunted him into the night. When his failure to support the others was shoved in his face, Arthur swore not to forget them again. And we haven't seen him make good on that promise, but, give him time. It's been, who knows, a couple days since the others arc wrapped up. And in this particular story arc, when the fate of Graves' family was revealed to them, Arthur argues that the League should have done more to save them, to help them somehow. Does he have a plan for how they would have done that? No. Does he know how they could have potentially helped them? Not at all. But neither did Batman, and look where it got them. They need to do better. and Aquaman wants to be the one leading them to it. We also get one more really interesting Aquaman idea in Justice League issue 10, because it's Vulko's first New 52 appearance. We didn't meet this guy over in Aquaman's own book until issue 0, which was published the month that issue 13 should have been published. In that particular issue of Justice League, though, Johns is doing these miniature flashbacks as the story moves from each member of the League. When we get to Arthur, Cyborg calls him and says that Batman needs him to teleport up to the Watchtower because some important stuff is going down and they need him. Aquaman tries to blow this request off, saying that he has things to do. He did just save a sinking cruise boat after all. But then we see a brief flashback of young shirtless Arthur. Based upon the shirtlessness, the presence of his trident, and the necklace on his neck, I would guess that this scene happened sometime between Arthur beating Vulko, his adventures with the others, and settling into the throne. I kind of almost think that Vulko introduced Arthur to Atlantis, and this I'm going to call this shirtless Arthur because he has no shirt. I think Vulko introduced Arthur to Atlantis, and Atlantis went, well, you can clearly breathe underwater, but we don't believe that you are the son of dear respected Queen Atlanta, and we already have a king in young Prince Orm, so go away. And so Arthur maybe went on a quest to prove himself, and by getting the dead king's trident, the symbol of being the king of Atlantis, maybe that is what proved that he was worthy to be leader. And then he goes back to Atlantis, and they're like, well, you've got the trident, but like, we still don't like you. I don't know. This particular era of Aquaman's history is largely unexplored, and I'm just theorizing and spitballing things, but this is kind of the best place that I can see to slot this flashback in. Anyways, Arthur tells Vulko that Atlantis has not and will never accept him. They're a bunch of jerks. They're no different than the surface world, he argues. But Vulko assures him that that just isn't true. As the advisor to the king for years, he knows the people of Atlantis. He knows what they need, even if they won't admit it. Arthur is their king. It's his responsibility to lead them. In the present day, though, Arthur tells Cyborg that he's on his way. He ditches his responsibility to Atlantis. Or you could read that scene as Arthur wanting to help people and save lives, but he has a greater responsibility to the Justice League, and so he goes to that story element. Once again, Arthur is decidedly more complicated than he looks, and I love that! I also dig that Vulko is trying to get Arthur to settle into being the king, a motivation that we saw echoed years later in their story as his big reason for manipulating the events of the Throne of Atlantis crossover. Tasty! During issues 13 and 14 of Justice League, by the way, the League pursues and confronts one of Wonder Woman's main bad guys, the Cheetah. During the story, Aquaman actually comes up with the plan for how they deal with the Cheetah, and the League does it. We also learn during this story arc about Yawara! This blew my floopin' mind. When I got to the other story arc, I researched the cast to see if they showed up anywhere else in the New 52 or if I was missing some information, like by the time we reached the end of it. I was basically looking for information that was established but was not part of the Aquaman and the Others ongoing series because I didn't want to spoil that book if I do intend to hunt it down. I've been poking around eBay. I've kind of had my eyes on some lots. I've just been really strapped for cash, and I should not be buying weird Aquaman spin-offs that I'm probably not going to treasure all that much. So I didn't want to spoil anything. And nothing that I read told me about these two issues of Justice League as being connected to Yawara at all. And I'll admit, it's a minor connection. In the story, we learn that the cheetah is actually a god who aids the San tribe somewhere in South America. Once every generation, one of them is chosen by the cheetah and becomes their warrior avatar who helps protect the tribe and help them hunt, those kinds of things. But a white man came to the jungle wielding a knife called the God Slayer, an ancient weapon capable of killing even gods. Using it, he killed that particular avatar of the cheetah, but he only killed its earthly avatar. The cheetah god somehow survived and added its own curse to the God Slayer. anyone who was cut by the knife would now become possessed by the cheetah, giving it an odd form of eternal life instead of one killing people. That hunter went on to pursue Yawara, called the chosen jaguar goddess of the Amazon. But Yawara killed that dude and then fed him to her cats, causing the knife to be lost for a time. That explains Yawara's powers, if only kinda, sorta, a little bit. She's been chosen by the jaguar goddess, giving her enhanced strength, speed, healing, and the ability to communicate with the jungle cats. This is a weird fact of the story to get in Justice League, because if you are just reading the Justice League, then this reveal means absolutely nothing to you. Geoff Johns doesn't tell us who the hunter was, or what the San tribe calls him, because I'm sure that they have their own curse for this dude. He killed one of their avatars, but he tells us about Yawara by name, a detail that only Aqua fans would know about at this point. Wonder Woman ends up throwing Cheetah into a river, by the way, and Aquaman captures her. His plan works. This was the plan that he pitched. Yo, get her to a river, and I'll put her in like a headlock. So, good for him. I won't say it's the cleverest strategy that I've ever seen. It's no Batman level strategy, but it worked. Can't argue with the results. They catch the cheetah. At the very end of the story, we also see Cheetah being placed in Belle Reve, and she communicates with someone that she is in position. She then tells them to just let her know when Black Manta arrives. Another story element that Justice League readers would have no idea about. It also means that this story, and the one with David Graves, where Batman names drops the others, takes place before the others' story arc in Aquaman's continuity, because that story ended with Black Manta being put in Belle Reve prison. So Johns was actually hinting about the others in Justice League before they ever came back into Arthur's life at all. And this story element with Cheetah and Black Manta will then go on to the Forever Evil event that I mentioned in our last episode, 26.14, if you're curious. I shared quite a bit of praise to author Geoff Johns for the incredibly subtle storytelling work that he was doing during the Throne of Atlantis crossover. Stuff like Arthur touching the lasso of truth, or Cyborg being made of apocalyptican technology, and thus he has an advantage over Atlantean technology. These are small story elements that you don't need to understand in order to engage with the entire story that Johns is giving us. But if you did read Justice League, then you know about them, and they have a deeper, more engaging reading experience. But I'm not sure if that idea runs in the same direction in regards to the Aquaman elements that we've got showing up in Justice League. Because it feels incredibly weird to me that the San tribe narrator would name someone like Yawara, but she would not name the man who killed her mother, who was the previous Cheetah host. If we are reading Aquaman, like we are, then sure, we get that reference, but there's no point clarifying the matter at all. And maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, but it feels important in the story. Johns did something similar with characters like Garth and Tula over in Aquaman, where he name-dropped them, but then we didn't get any context for what those names are, or who they mean, or what they mean to Aquaman, or what role they have in the story. What comics do I need to buy in order to learn more about them? I'm willing to buy more comics. Believe me, I'm willing to buy more comics. But without an editorial box or a clear in-story mention of something, I have no idea. And that's bad marketing. Good storytelling, I would argue, because I'm curious and I'm asking questions, but bad marketing. So if you were a Justice League reader and you saw this mention of Yawara, the woman who killed the guy who killed the last cheetah, you might think that she was important to the plot of the story, right? That she might have a power or an ability that would lead the League to defeat the present cheetah. But no, there's nothing. Yawara being involved in the background of this story adds nothing to this story at all, and it only helps broaden my understanding of Yawara, who isn't even a thing if all you read is the Justice League. It's not like she has an ongoing comic or a regular team role somewhere or anything. There is nowhere to explore her backstory until the Aquaman and the Others ongoing series launches, and that's not going to happen for like another year, baby! Similarly, learning that Cheetah being put in Belle Reve works for the most part. It hints that there's a larger scheme afoot, which is fine. That is an idea that's going to keep people buying the comics in the long term, knowing that there's some kind of manipulations going on behind the scenes. That's fine. I don't mind that. It works pretty well. But, again, if you are just reading the Justice League comic book, then you have no idea who or what Black Manta is, or where to go to learn more information about him. Hopefully, I guess, you'll bust out your phone and do a quick Google search, but you shouldn't have to do a research project to enjoy your comic books, y'all. I'll do it, don't get me wrong, I'll do it! But I shouldn't have to do it, in my opinion. However, Johns is trusting that if you are buying the Justice League, then you're probably buying the other comics that these characters star in. After all, if you're enjoying this, then you would probably enjoy their individual titles, right? If you don't like Wonder Woman, why are you buying Justice League? If you don't like Green Lantern, why are you buying Justice League? But Johns is also using this title as a vehicle to help build up Aquaman and how cool he is to the audience. We have now seen him put on the same level as Batman several times in the story. We're now getting lore drops that are specific to Aquaman's narrative, and we are about to head into a big crossover that is built around Aquaman. Why did Geoff Johns wait to have Aquaman take the throne again? So that he could have Arthur do it on the biggest stage possible. I don't know if Justice League was a fantastically well-selling book during this particular era of DC's publication. I know that it kept Geoff Johns on as the author for years, and it frequently featured some of the most talented artists in comics, including names like Jim Lee, Gene Ha, Carlos D'Anda, Ivan Reis, Jesus Size, Tony Daniel, Doug Monk, and more. But the League is one of DC's most famous titles. It's home to some of their most important characters, and it can often be considered the centerpiece of their publishing line. When something happens in a Justice League comic book, comic buyers care about it. So getting all of those Justice League buying eyes over on an Aquaman comic was a huge deal. Having Arthur retake the throne at the end of the story cemented him as the king of Atlantis. Not because of his birthright, not just because he was born to it like a rich kid. No, Arthur took the throne because he's a hero. He did it in order to save lives and protect people. That heroism was just demonstrated on the biggest stage possible, a war that would be the centerpiece of the DC Universe's attention until the next big event and war, and in one of the comics that DC was focusing so much of its amazing talent on, instead of just being a background element of Arthur's life, already existing in that nebulous black hole that is the New 52's history. By taking this long journey through Aquaman's series, and this nice, cute little side trip through the Justice League comic book, Johns has invested us in Arthur as a person, as a hero, and now we are personally invested in him being a king. If Aquaman's ongoing series launched with him as the King of Atlantis, it would have been a box checked off on the list of who Aquaman is, sure, but would we have cared this much? Would how he became the King of Atlantis matter at all? Would him being the King of Atlantis matter to the stories? We don't know. I mean, technically, we'll never know. But right now, between the end of the crossover and Arthur's new status quo next episode, I know that I want to know what comes next. That I'm excited for this change. That I mourn everything that Arthur has lost in accepting the throne again. And I want to know what's coming. And that is incredibly effective storytelling. That's what you want. You want people reading your comic books. You want people to want to read your comic books. And I want to read Aquaman comic books. Just so y'all are aware, Arthur does remain a part of the Justice League going forward, although I would argue that his role remains either just about the same or like slightly diminished. That is to say, not all that important to the overall events of Justice League. As his story complements or contrasts what we're seeing over in his ongoing series, I will do my best to let you know. I do not want to cover all of the New 52's Justice League series, and it's only a few issues after the Throne of Atlantis crossover that the League gets into another crossover called the Trinity War with the other 2 Justice League books that are being published, which then leads into the Forever Evil crossover, so it's just this biggest style of storytelling from here on out, and it's honestly kind of exhausting. I'm really looking forward to just getting back to Aquaman comics, where it's just, hey, here's what Aquaman's doing. You like that? That's great. Do you need to read these Justice League comic books in order to understand Arthur's own comic book? Absolutely not. I maintain very adamant about that. Have I enjoyed reading these? Absolutely. Do I think there's a lot of elements that complement what was going on in Arthur's own comic book? 100%. And I do think that for a more rounded out experience, reading these Justice League issues helps. However, if you like Aquaman and all you want is Aquaman, I think you're fine just reading Aquaman. Perfectly okay with that. So I hope you all enjoyed this weird trip through the lands of the Justice League for an episode. I know that I promised there would be an issue of Aquaman here, but I just could not get these ideas out of my head between producing the episode we got last week and the episode we're going to get next week. Now that I have gotten them out, I promise you we are getting back to Aquaman. I know this because I've already fully recorded and written that episode. I've already written and recorded that episode. It necessitates that you would have to write it in order to record it first, doesn't it? Just from a continuity perspective, that wouldn't make sense otherwise. We are going to do one more episode that covers just a single issue of Aquaman so that we can establish his new status quo and really set up the new story arc. And then we're going to start to get into the final year of Geoff Johns' time as author of Aquaman. I have decided once and for all that that is where I'm going to stop covering Aquaman's stories. We will cover Johns' run, and then I think it's time to move to some warmer waters. Wink. So, for realsies, next time, Aquaman is the new king of Atlantis. But that role comes with new challenges, new foes, and some old problems. Really old problems, like ones that date back to the founding of Atlantis. So join me in a week for Comic Book Breakdown episode 26.16 of Aquaman. Who are you fighting for? And thank you again for coming on this weird Justice League journey with me. If you enjoyed this episode of Breakdown, please make sure to hit that like button, and if you are not subscribed to the show, then click on that as well. I love getting feedback, and I would really appreciate it if you did so. If you have any questions, concerns, or would like to suggest a comic or a series to me, Breakdown can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and on a variety of podcast platforms, with links in the description for this episode below, as well as the email cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Thank you for your time and attention.